Today, we're getting the insights from indie game developer Rosune Studios. Thanks for being with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
Awesome, I'm doing great. So, I've been following you on X, and the game that I'm familiar with is Shell of a King. You want to describe this game?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Rosune. Shell of a King is the indie, or not the indie game, the bullet hell RPG that I've been working on for the past, I think, about 3 years now. Currently in early access. I released it in early access around May of last year. So I'm sort of gearing up to release fully this coming August, maybe a little bit later.
So, you've been working on it for 3 years. You doing it all by yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a solo developer. That means I have to do everything. So yeah, I have to do all the music, the coding.
Is it your first game?
Um, so yes, it is my first game. Though I've done since I've been working on it for so long. I've done a few game jams over the past couple years. So I guess it's technically my first game, but I'd say it doesn't it doesn't look like my first game. I guess is how maybe I describe it.
What was your programming experience like before starting the game?
So I do have a I do have formal education in software. So I did go to college. I studied computer science. Um, so I did have a decent foundation, I'd say, for starting game development. Um, but I definitely would say that uh, I only really used a small fraction of actually what I learned in college for game development. I think.
What game engine are you using?
So yeah, I'm using Unity. Uh, Unity gets a bad rap these days, which is kind of deserved, but yeah, still sticking with Unity for now.
I like it. I think it's a lot more intuitive than
Yeah.
Unreal. I follow you on X, and one thing that I really like is how you regularly put out the bullet list of all the changes and things that you're working on.
Hmm.
It seems like you have a pretty good project management skill set. Do you do this full time, or do you have another job too?
No, so I'm a software engineer full time. So this is sort of a side thing. But yeah, my I've been putting out weekly updates for the past year, basically. Which is kind of tough to manage sometimes, but I always set my deadline for okay on Friday I'm going to push out an update to Steam, and so that way at least I can sort of keep myself accountable and getting things done. I think.
What are the big things left on your list before you consider it complete?
Okay, so if I was to set the timeline right, if I was to fully release in August, that'd give me about a little under 5 months, right? Um, so I think like I'd like to spend the next 1 or 2 months on adding new content. So I'd like to add two more bosses to the game. Maybe whatever else I have on the list. And after that, I'd like to spend another month polishing up and like solving all the bugs and all that. And then I'd like to spend another month on music alone because I think right now there's a lot of songs that I think I'd like to redo, or they're sort of um, more of a concept rather than a finished piece. And then after that, I think that would leave me with like one more month left, and to do like marketing and stuff like that.
When it comes to the marketing now, are you doing anything in particular?
Um, also, marketing has definitely been a struggle for me. So, uh, at the moment, I've been trying to reach out to content creators. Um, I've been making some YouTube shorts. Sort of those haven't been doing amazing, but that's okay. Um, I try to post on social media regularly, just stuff like that. But hopefully, I'll have at least something more concrete in the later months.
A lot of people say the marketing aspect is challenging. What do you find challenging about it? Is it that you're not getting the results you want, or that you're not sure what to do?
Um, Okay, so my biggest issue with marketing is that the amount of it doesn't matter how many hours I spend on marketing, right? It My game will never get better if I'm only doing marketing stuff. So for right now, it sort of feels like if I'm spending 2 hours making a YouTube short and then it doesn't get the results I want, then I should have been spending that time just making my game better. So I think the biggest challenge for me is that it sort of feels a little bit random. It's not like the time I put in is the reward I get out of it. Unlike when I'm actually working on my game and I can actually just make it better. So I think so it sort of feels like there's some randomness to it that isn't too fun to deal with.
So you mentioned adding new bosses and doing some of this. Is this largely based on feedback that you're getting from players, or how are you prioritizing things?
Um, yeah. So to be honest, I think most of the changes I make are sort of just things I come up with. I think like a lot of my development is driven on based on what I think would be cool. So I'm just like, okay, if I think this sort of puzzle would be cool, I'll just add it in. I won't like really think too hard about it. Um, I do try to take into account what people say. So I do have some playtesters who will give me feedback, and I try to make the changes I think that I agree with. Going forward, I think I'd like to get more feedback over the next coming months since I'm sort of approaching release, and then I can sort of iron out what the biggest issues are. But overall, I think it's sort of been my vision as to what new content I add.
How do you find playtesters?
Um, well, it's been sort of a ride, but I sort of posting on Reddit has been the biggest help for me, I think. So Show of a King is like largely inspired by the MMO game Realm of the Mad God, which is it's a very old school game actually. I think it's almost 20 years old now or something, but sort of it's mechanically based on that game. So I have at least a solid player base I can reach out to and be like, okay, this game is similar to Realm of the Mad God. Can you check it out? Let me know what you think. How does it feel? How does it play? Sort of stuff like that.
Have you considered doing a Kickstarter or anything to help fund the game?
I don't really think so. I think like at this point, money isn't really a huge issue for me. I'm fortunate enough to be in a situation where I have a a decent paying job, so I don't have to really think about it too much. And there isn't really a lot of upfront costs I have to cover when you're a solo dev. I think the only thing I've really had to pay for is I had to buy a Steam Deck so I could test Steam Deck support. But other than that, I haven't really had any costs, which I'm fortunate to be in a situation like that. So I haven't really thought about it because Kickstarter, I don't think I really need one. Um, yeah.
So even let's say you did do one and you raised, let's say, $20,000. Is there anything that you would put the money towards? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Um, I think if I had $20,000 to spend, I think um I think commissioning artists would be really cool. I think my biggest struggle as a solo game developer is art. I think it'd be cool if I could commission some assets and stuff like that. Um, of course, I'm sure there's some marketing I could spend money on as well, but I think commissioning artists would be pretty cool. I think.
Have you used any assets from any of the stores, or is it all totally handmade from you?
I think I have a couple tile sets I got off. I think the Itch store for cheap. Uh, but that was so long ago. I don't. That would have been 2-3 years ago. So not a whole lot to be honest. All the sounds I use are free. I write all the music. I draw most of everything else. So that's about it.
I see your keyboard there. Do you have formal education in music too?
Um, well, so actually, the reason why I started game development was because I wanted something to write music for. Uh, so I was like, okay, it's sort of hard to go from like having no so like if I wanted to write music for a game, I would at least need some sort of experience doing it, and I need sort of a portfolio of the songs I wrote for this game. So getting into your first game is kind of hard. So I figured, I'll just like make my own game, and then I can write music for it, and that can sort of be my first piece for my portfolio. But it kind of evolved since then. But yeah, music was sort of the first component that I had. I played a lot of jazz in high school and college. Um, I think I took piano class in high school every year. Uh, so yeah, I have a lot of experience with music. That's sort of the driving force behind game development for me.
You say jazz on the keyboard?
I play saxophone as well, but
Oh, very cool.
that's sort of my main instrument. I'm not like amazing at keyboard, but I can play it all right.
Um, you may not know, but I have two YouTube channels. One is for the software stuff, and one is
Uh-huh.
for music. And I
Oh, okay,
also
okay.
interview game music composers over there too. So I have
Oh,
the
that's awesome.
background of both myself. I've frequently talked about the similarities between music and programming. Have you noticed any
Hmm.
parallels yourself?
Um, I think so. I think so for sure. I think as a process, it's pretty similar. Um, though I do think programming is inherently more problem solving based. Um, but I think you can definitely be creative in both in your approach to things and how you solve problems.
Yeah, the creativity thing I think is overlooked with the programming because people think it's
Hmm.
very technical, and it is, but it's kind of like writing poetry. Is poetry challenging because of syntax and grammar, or is it because you have to be creative? What do you use software wise to make music?
Um, so I used FL Studio for I think most of when I was actually like recording stuff, I was using FL Studio for most of high school and college. I have recently started using Logic, so uh, Logic is sort of my go-to if I'm recording or producing anything that's not like EDM kind of stuff. So I will use both from time to time. I think I like to do my mixing and mastering in FL Studio, and most of my production in Logic.
I went down the same road. Do you Have you tried out the mastering assistant in Logic?
No, I don't think so.
It's like AI mastering. It's kind of like Ozone there, and I found it
Oh yeah,
actually
yeah.
works really well.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I'll check that out.
Are you doing sound effects too?
Uh, I think I started out trying to do sound effects, but it was sort of a lot of works. No, I just go to I think the website's called zapsplat.com. I think it's a exceptional resource for finding sounds, and they're all free. They're all um, you don't even have to credit uh, the creators of the sounds or the website or anything if you have their gold membership, which is like $30 a year. So that's been a very valuable resource for me, I think.
What about your art? What kind of software do you use for that?
For art, I use Clip Studio Paint, uh, which is kind of just like a Photoshop clone, but it's quite good. I've got my little drawing tablet that I use. I also use Asaprite for some of the pixel art stuff I do. If you look at the art of Shell of King, actually, you'll notice that like the tile sets are, if you zoom out, they look like pixel art, but they're not. Uh, so how would I describe this? So each square is a 16 by 16 grid, but is upscaled to 256 by 256 to look like it's hand drawn. So if you zoom in on any of the tiles, you'll see that there's actual like brush strokes rather than individual pixels. Um, but but yeah, those are the two. Clip Studio Paint and Asaprite are the main art stuff I use.
When it comes to the systems and the mechanics of the game, is there anything particularly unique to your game there?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before that it's Shell of a King's heavily inspired by Realm of the Mad God. So Realm of the Mad God used to be. a 2D top-down game where you can rotate the camera, uh, sort of based on, so you can rotate your orientation relative to the bosses, basically. So you don't have to worry about where you are in relation to the boss. So like if you're above the boss, for example, it'll be kind of hard to see if the boss is right below you, because the boss's sprite might occlude your character. So you can rotate the camera so you don't have to deal with that issue. And then recently, Realm of the Mad God converted to 3D, so it's a 3D top-down game where you can still rotate the camera, and that's basically the camera system I'm using for Shell of a King. It's a 3D game. Most of the art is 2D though, so I'm sort of sprite billboarding a lot of this stuff. But you can being able to rotate the camera in such a way isn't typical of these kinds of games. If you think about games like Enter the Gungeon, Binding of Isaac, they're all fixed 2D games. This is a one in 3D where you can actually manipulate the camera, which proposes all kinds of problems for me to solve. But that's sort of the main unique, I think, thing about Shell of a King, I think.
Is there anything that's been the biggest technical challenge?
Um, well, there's definitely been a few technical challenges. Uh, so Shell of a King started out as completely 2D. I didn't have any camera rotation at all. And then I think a year in, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to add it. So I converted everything to 3D, and I had to write like a custom camera matrix for it to work. It's actually kind of complicated, but so managing the 2D and 3D mix is actually kind of challenging, because all of a sudden you have to deal with a bunch of problems, like sprites like mixing with 3D objects. At some point, you're going to have 3D objects like actually intersecting the camera, and it's like how do you handle that? Do I cull them? Do I just leave it in? So I think the biggest thing for me is managing that 2D and 3D mix of sprites and actual meshes. It can be it's just a tough problem to solve, especially when you have shadows and stuff like that going on.
So, what is the final objective of the game? Like, how do you beat the game?
so so it is a Souls like game, if you're familiar with Dark Souls and stuff like Hollow Knight, where open world is maybe a little generous, but it's sort of non-linear. It's based on your progressions based on the bosses you beat, who will lock off different parts of the map. Uh, and so the main objective to Shell of a King is is beat the final boss, I suppose. There's a story and lore and all of that, but uh, I guess that's how I would sum up the objective. But yeah.
So, as you're progressing, is there? I guess you're leveling up. How do you power up? And is there any kind of crafting or skill tree or anything?
Yeah, so there is leveling up. It's just sort of a traditional. I think the leveling system I use is pretty similar to Dark Souls, in the sense that you have your currency. In this case, it's just coins, but so you level up stats, and the higher level you are, the more expensive it is to level up stats. You'll need more of the resource to do so. Um, so that's sort of you can level up there's like I don't know, like 8 stats you can level up. So that's how you sort of get stronger. So like your attacks will do more damage, you'll have more health, more defense, stuff like that. But then I sort of uh, borrowed off the Hollow Knight charm system, which is you as you play the game, you collect certain items, and you can equip them. You can equip them to gain their effects, and each charm has different weights, so you can only some may take up more slots than others, and those are the ones that are generally stronger. So you can only have a certain amount of them equipped at a time. So Shell of a King is quite similar to that, where you sort of you gather a bunch of items, but you can only have a few equipped at a time, and so that's how you sort of decide what kind of build you're playing. maybe my build is more tanky, and I'm it's okay for me to take a lot of damage, or maybe my build is more glass cannon. My charms, boost my damage but lower my health, stuff like that. So that's sort of the main progression, I think, for Shell of a King.
So it sounds like there's some replayability there too, where there's different ways to play through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just watching people play the game, it's interesting to see what a lot of people are doing. There's some people who don't even touch the health stat; they won't level it up. They won't. So they're purely focused on, okay, I need to do as much damage as possible. And then there are people who only level up the health stat, and so they're doing like no damage, but they can take like every hit. So a lot of people play the game differently. So yeah, there's definitely big replayability there, and one of the another thing that I think adds to the replayability is every enemy in the game has a unique item drop, and the item drops are random. So as you play the game, you might get some items that you wouldn't have before, and a lot of these items are really strong and sort of can change the course of how you're playing the game. So yeah, there's that as well.
Have you added any cheat codes to the game?
No, no, I haven't added anything like that. There is an easy mode now, though. It's like kind of a cheat code, I guess. I don't know.
Have you considered, or do you have any desire to work with a publisher?
Um, I think I could. I don't really know what the logistics of that would be. I think usually it's sort of like they would take some sort of percentage, and then they would uh, provide publishing. I guess is sort of the idea, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing they typically provide is not only some guidance on the design, but the marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be useful, I guess. But I think yeah, my goal for Shell of a King is not to make money, so I think the more I can keep it grassroots, probably the better, I think.
What are your future aspirations? Do you want to make more games? One day, do you want a studio or something?
I think that could be really cool. It's sort of hard to say because my interests change all the time, but I think if I was to envision some sort of future, I think it'd be cool if I finish Shell of a King, and then I think I'd like to start making horror games. I think that'd be really cool. That was one thing I wanted to do. Uh, there's also a lot of music stuff I'd like to do as well. I think I'd like to start, yeah, recording, writing some other kinds of music, and hopefully, like, I think I'd like to write music for other people's games. I think that'd be really cool. Um, and sort of Shell of a King is left sort of has an open-ended ending. So if I was to make a part two for Shell of a King, that would also be cool to do. So those are sort of my plans. I think a game studio would be cool, but I don't know how realistic that is, at least right now.
With the music, are you doing any adaptive music with the layers using the middleware like Fmod or WIs?
Uh, no, I'm not familiar with what that is.
So that's when um, you've got different tracks in your DAW and you can export all those stems separately. And then
Mm-hmm.
as you're going through an area, when you get closer to the boss, the other layers can kick in and like
Right.
ramp up the music, that kind of stuff.
No, I think so. Actually, I'm working on an NPC right now that plays the flute. And so the way I have it set up is that the closer you are to the NPC, the louder the flute is. And the NPC is going to be invisible, so the only way you can locate her is by following the uh, the intensity of the flute. So I am doing something like that with that character. Um, there's some I do some other stuff like that. I think in one of the areas there's sort of a bunch of water, and while you're in the water, it'll change the song. It'll add or slash remove. I think it puts a low pass filter on the song when you're underwater. Classic stuff like that. Yeah, I really do like the dynamic music in games. I think it's really cool.
So this flute NPC, have you thought not just here but in general about accessibility? So like if someone is deaf, is there a way that they can still make use of that mechanic?
Uh, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't really thought about it. Uh, I imagine I could come up with a solution, though. I mean, I could just make them NPC, uh, not invisible. But I think as a smaller developer, it's kind of hard to cater to accessibility of everybody. Uh, is it is it reasonable to expect the developer to do so? Maybe, but I think I think if I encounter those problems, I'll definitely solve them. But yeah, it's really hard to figure stuff like that out.
Yeah, another common one is color blindness. A lot of
Right.
people are red and green, so if you use like green for good and red for bad, and they're right next to each other, sometimes they can't see the difference between those two.
Mm.
Is there anything you wish you knew before you started?
I'm not really sure. I don't really think so. Actually, there's a lot of a lot of things I've learned, on the way. I mean, there's a lot of like very Unity specific stuff that I've had to. So I think like even now I'm still having to debug bugs that I I sort of created at the very beginning that I didn't really know how stuff worked. I think specifically using like Unity's layer system, like collision layers, was something I didn't really understand at the beginning, and now I have a good grasp on it. So now I'm going through. I'm like, why is this on this layer? I have no idea why I put it on this layer. So I think that's the main thing. But I think when you're developing over the course of years, I think it's okay to make mistakes and fix them later. Yeah, I don't think I would have learned anything new.
When it comes to your designing of the game, did you start with a game design document or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think my planning has been very minimal. I sort of just go with what I think is cool. I think I said something like that before, but I think thinking in scenes helps a lot. So rather than how do I get from A to B, I just kind of decide what A and B is, and then I will link them again at some point later. And I think like a lot of the like I think I had like the ending scene sort of envisioned in my head like before I even started coding the game, but I have no idea what would go on between that. So that's sort of how I've been approaching it. I think it's okay to do stuff like that when you're working solo and you have the capabilities to sort of just do whatever you want. I think if I was working on a team, then yeah, a very structured plan would be really nice. But then I would then at least someone would be dedicated to making those plans rather than you know sort of deciding on the fly.
Well, before we go, is there anything else you want to plug or share?
I mean, I've got my X and my Blue Sky, which is just at Rosune Studios, just sort of spelt like that. I have a YouTube channel as well, which is also Rosune Studios, but I don't post a whole lot on there. But other than that, I mean, yeah, Shell of a King has a free demo if you want to check it out on Steam. Um, yeah, that's I think that's about it for B.
Awesome. Well, it was great talking to you and learning about your game. And I wish you luck with the game. And I hope it's really successful and that we get to chat another time about some other game you work on in the future.
Awesome, thanks, John. Thanks for having me.